Hi, and welcome to the Lavender Learning Channel. My name is Jane and I'm an Australian educator with over 20 years experience. If you'd like to stay up to date with my latest videos, please hit the subscribe button to subscribe to my channel. If you have some questions that you'd like me to answer, please feel free to shoot me an email to Jane, Jane, at lavenderlearning.com.au. And I'll look at all the comments and suggestions that you might send through for future episodes. Now, today's topic is part of the Getting Ready for School series. It's really important that we send children off to school as well prepared as possible. And so we're going to be talking about different facets of readiness in some future videos. And today we're going to talk about some personal habits and skills that you can be developing with your child so that they're as ready as possible when they get to school. Now, the first thing I'd like to discuss is establishing a routine before the child starts school, so that when they start school, that routine can continue and it's not a big shock to their system. Some children will have been in a preschool education sort of setting, a childcare centre or a kindergarten or something like that, depending on where you live in the world and what it might be called. And so they may already have something of a routine, but it's really important that you establish a regular bedtime and a regular getting up time so that your child's body adjusts to that, and so that they're able to have the energy that they need when they do get to school, as well as I said, just keeping that nice smooth pattern in their lives so that it's not a big disruption and a big change when they start school. Part of that is something that I've added on the comment there, which is including being ready to meet a deadline. So if you currently have fairly relaxed days where you sort of go with the flow, it's probably a good idea to start adding in some things which have deadlines and starting times so that your child gets used to the idea that you have to be at a certain place at a certain time. So you can be practicing getting up, getting ready, getting out of the house and being somewhere at a certain time. If your child's catching a bus, maybe you can start practicing getting down to the bus stop fully dressed by a certain time so that when school starts and they've got a lot of things to be thinking about, getting ready in the morning isn't an extra stress that they've got to adjust to because they're already familiar with it. A second and quite simple thing you can ensure your child has ready for school is independent toileting. That means that they can take themselves into a toilet cubicle, manage to lock and unlock the door if necessary, depending on the setting that they're going to be going to in education, that they know which toilet to use, and then that they can manage everything they need to do inside the toilet cubicle on their own, and then come out and wash their hands, dry their hands, and make their way back to their classroom. I'd practice that with the uniform on so that you can see if there are any tricky parts in terms of adjusting the belt or buttons and those sorts of things on their uniform to make sure that they're able to do that independently. Along the same lines, independent dressing is important. So making sure that that uniform can be put on independently by the child. And I know most of my photos here include shoes. I'll tell you why that is in a minute. But also buttons and things. You might think, oh, look, my child mostly just will be pulling on a shirt and pulling on some pants and that'll be it. But if there's buttons, make sure your child has practiced how to do buttons. In winter, make sure they've practiced how to do up and undo their zip. Make sure that they have practiced putting on, if they change into a sports uniform, the sports uniform back to their formal uniform. Or if they're going to be swimming, they've practiced putting on their bathers and their sun shirt or their hat or whatever it is they need to put on. Go through that routine and make sure your child can do it independently. Because we might get them ready in the morning and send them off to school, but the rest of the day at school, depending on what activities they're doing, they'll have to do that by themselves if possible. The reason I focused on footwear on this slide is because children often take their shoes off in the playground to get into a sand pit or to play outside on the grass perhaps. And so it's really important that they can put their shoes on themselves and take them off themselves. So I've put a big red cross there through a shoe with laces. If your child can't do their own laces, they can't tie laces yet, shoelaces, then don't send them to school with shoes that have tied laces, because they won't be able to put them on for themselves, which means that every time they want to play, they have to find an adult or a peer who can do that for them. And for some children, that may be a little bit intimidating. They might choose not to play or not engage in that activity because they don't want to take their shoes off. And we don't want that. Even with Velcro shoes, you'll see that I've put a couple of images from a black formal shoe there on the slide. Velcro does up nice and easily, and that's fantastic. And you can practice with the child how to make sure that the both sides of the Velcro are done properly so that they're not sticking to the carpet in the classroom or anything like that. But just be mindful that sometimes on the other side of a shoe that has Velcro, it may also have a buckle or a piece of metal that it has to be threaded through. That's an important fine motor skill. So just practice that threading with your child as well. It's not as hard as tying laces, but it may be something that they struggle with if they haven't practiced. And so for sports shoes as well, I'd recommend Velcro if possible. Now, the next thing is being able to use the equipment that they have for school. So teachers are sort of prepared that they'll be teaching children to use pencils and paper and understand the classroom routine, use the computers and iPads and all of those things. That's within the teacher's expectations. We sometimes don't stop and think about the fact that some children haven't had to manage their own bag. They haven't had to manage their own drink bottles or lunch boxes very often. If they've been in a childcare setting where lunch is served to them, they may just sit down at a table where there's a plate and a cup already set out for them, and they haven't had to open any packets or anything like that. So think carefully about your child's bag and make sure they know how to do up and undo their bag so that they can take things out at school and keep everything else secure. So teaching them to do that zip back up if possible. At my daughter's school, there are some very clever crows that will come and find the smallest gap in open zips and get into school bags. So you want your child to be making sure that they're closing their bag properly. When it comes to lunch boxes and things, it's important to make sure your child knows where all the compartments are and where their food will be inside their lunchbox, and also that they will be able to access that by undoing the zip or lifting the different clips. And when you've practiced opening them, then make sure you practice reclosing them. Nothing worse than yogurt through a lunchbox because a child hasn't closed that container properly, or things that shouldn't have been mixed becoming mixed because the compartments or packets or whatever it might be aren't closed. If you're buying pre-packaged food, make sure your child's practiced how to open those packets, or take them out of the packets yourself before you send them to school if they're not going to be able to open them without help from a teacher. When it comes to drink bottles, think about the type of lid. You'll see on the slide here that I have one that has the thread that spins on to keep the lid on, and I have one that has a flip top. Both of those pose risks for young children who may not be experienced with them. The flip top lid needs to be really well clicked down, so practice that with your child. And the same with the threading. If it's not on properly and it misses the thread, then it can leak everywhere. And there's nothing worse than, well, maybe the yogurt that I mentioned before or a squash banana, but a drink bottle slowly leaking through a whole bag throughout the course of a day is not very pleasant and can be really damaging to other things such as books, which might be in your child's bag. So practice how to keep their drink bottles, how to open them, and then how to keep them closed as well. And I did suggest, you can see there's a blue arrow there on the orange drink bottle. I like that one because it's translucent, and so you can see what your child, how much water your child has been drinking, and your child's teacher can see at a glance how much they've been drinking. I know those types of bottles aren't insulated, so it's a bit of a balancing sort of act there to decide whether you want your child to have really cold water throughout the day, or whether you'd be happy for them to drink room temperature water, but have the teacher a bit more empowered to monitor how much water the child is drinking. And then finally, one last thing, practice separating from you, the parent or caregiver. Those first few days of school are quite stressful for everybody because the child is separating from you in a strange environment that they haven't been part of before. Often you're meeting the teachers for the first time, and so there's lots of adjusting happening, and it can feel a little bit scary for everybody. And there's probably some social and emotional tips that I could give you around helping that separation to become a bit easier. But at this point in this video, we're just going to talk about how you can make sure your child is ready for that. And one of the things you can be doing is practicing leaving them with other people that you trust before school starts. Now, they may already go to kindy and or a childcare program, and if they can do that and you feel like school is going to be very similar, then they may already have this skill down pat. But if they're normally with you and they haven't really had to be left with anybody very often, then maybe think about some ways you might be able to practice leaving them for a little while or stepping back, perhaps at a program at the library or at playgroup. Maybe talk to the coordinator and see if you could just stand back from the circle and let the child interact on their own for a little while. Or at swimming lessons, maybe you're going to step away from the edge and sit and just observe from a distance, or whatever it might be. Think about your life and the things that you have and the people that you have available to support you, and be preparing your child and yourself for that separation on day one, so that it's not an extra traumatic thing or a big distraction for the rest of the class if somebody's very, very upset. It makes it easier for everybody and much easier for your child's transition if they can be ready to separate from you with a quick peck on the cheek, goodbye, happy wave, or see you this afternoon, that sort of thing. All right, well, I hope those 5 tips are helpful. Keep an eye out. Please subscribe to my channel and keep an eye out for those future videos about some of the other things you can do to be getting your child ready for school in other facets of their lives. Thanks very much. Bye.